Hi friends, my name is Akhil Ahmed, and in this particular video tutorial I will show you how to create a store procedure for book management system in SQL Server. So the agenda of today's video tutorial is that we will see like how can we create a store procedure for book management system or for a library. So without wasting further time, let's jump to the demo. So in my SQL Server database I got few tables for creating this particular store procedure. Okay, so first of all we have the books table. Okay, so if you look at the books table, so it will hold the information about the books those we have in our library. So the books table will have the book ID and which will be unique. Okay, and then we will have the title of the book and then the author of the book, and then we have the status like whether the book is available or it's not available. Okay, and then it also have a column like available copies. So available copies means like initially whatever number of copies are available. So if someone borrows a book, then the available copies will be reduced by 1. Okay, so suppose initially there were 5 copies available of a book, and if someone borrows a book, then the available copies will be reduced to 4, 5 minus 1. Okay, and then we got another table, borrowers table. So the borrowers table will contain the information about the borrowers, those can borrow a book. Okay, so the borrower ID is of primary key. Okay, and then we have the borrower name, its email ID, and then we have the number of books borrowed. So suppose if the same person borrows more than one book, then the number of books they will be updated in the borrowers table. Okay, and then we got the transactions table. So whenever a borrower borrows a book, then an entry will be made into the transactions table. So here the transaction ID is of identity type, so it doesn't need any input from your side, but it will need the book ID like the book that you are borrowing, and then the borrower ID like the person who is borrowing the book, and then the checkout date like on which date the borrower is borrowing the book. It also contains the two foreign keys here. The first foreign key is the fk underscore book. Okay, so it means that only a valid book ID can be entered. So you cannot insert any non-existing book ID into the transactions table, and same way there is another foreign key fk underscore borrower. So it means that only a valid borrower ID can be passed to the store procedure. If you will try to pass a invalid borrower ID, then the transaction will fail. Okay, so that's why we have the foreign key on those two columns like the book ID and the borrower ID. So these are the three tables available here: books, and then the borrowers, and then the transactions. So if you look at this particular line, so we are actually inserting some sample books into the books table. So the first book is the Lord of the Rings, the second book is the 1984, and then the third book is the Harry Potter. So we are inserting initially the status of the book is available for all the books, and the number of copies for the Lord of the Rings are 5, 1984 are 3, and then for Harry Potter the available copies are 2. Okay, and if you further look, then we are populating some sample data into the borrowers table. So we are inserting a record for Alice, then for Bob, and then for Charlie. Okay, after execution of this particular query, it will create 3 tables and will insert 3 records into the books table and 3 records into the borrowers table. So let me execute the query. So the queries ran fine, and it has inserted 3 records into the books table and 3 records into the borrowers table. So right now the available copies of the books are here and all books are available, and if you look at the borrowers table, so none of the borrower has taken any book as of now. Okay, so what I want is that I want to create a store procedure, and in the store procedure I just want to pass the book ID like the book that we want to borrow, and then the borrower ID, for example. Okay, and then I also want to pass the checkout date like on which date you want to check out the book, like you want to take the book. Okay, and then what I want from the store procedure is that it should return the due date like on which date the borrower should return the book. So we will give the book to the borrower only for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks they should return the book. Okay, and then we will also return the transactions ID like what record actually got inserted to the transactions table. We will return the transactions ID. So these 2 columns, they will be of kind of output parameters in the store procedure. When we will run the transaction, then we will also reduce the available copies to like available copies -1. Okay, and for example, if the available copies will be 0, then the status will become unavailable. Okay, so until the available copies are 1, the status will be available for that particular book, and if the available copies will be 0, then the status will become unavailable. And every time a borrower borrows a book, the number of books borrowed should be increased to +1, so that we knows like how many books a person has borrowed. So this is kind of store procedure that we want to create. And yeah, so let's see like how we can create the store procedure for this kind of requirement. So let me open a new query window so that I can start writing the store procedure. So I will start writing the store procedure with the create command, create procedure. Okay, and then the procedure name. So I can call the procedure name as checkout book. Okay, so I will create the first parameter, and the first parameter will be the book ID. Okay, and it will be of type integer. Okay, and after that we will declare another variable, and another variable will be the borrower ID. So I can type borrower here ID. Okay, and it will be of type integer as well. And now the third parameter that we will give will be the checkout date. Okay, so I can give checkout date. Okay, and it will be of type date. Okay, and now so the checkout date, this will be the input parameter. So all these three parameters, they are the input parameter. Okay, and now we need to create two output parameters. Okay, so the first output parameter will be the due date. So I can write due date. Okay, and it will be of type date, and the type of parameter, the due date, it will be of output parameter. So we need to write the output here. So if we are not writing output next to the parameter name, it means that they are the input parameter. And if you need to declare the output parameter, then we explicitly need to write the output here. Okay, and now the last parameter that I want to create is the transaction ID. So I can write transaction ID of type integer. Okay, this is also of type output, so we need to write the output here. Okay, so we have declared all the parameters here, and now we can start writing the store procedure. Okay, so I can write begin. Okay, and now the first parameter I will declare is for the available copies. So I can write like declare @available copies integer. Okay, so this is the first parameter that we will use. Okay, so now the first thing that we will do, we will check for the available books. Okay, so how we will check it? We will write a select query like select @available copies equal to from what is that table name? The table name is the books. Okay, and the column name is the available copies. So we will write like select available copies from books, and where book ID equal to, and the book ID that we will pass from the input parameter. Okay, so according to the book ID, it will return the value like how many available copies are available of a book, and this value will be assigned to the available copies, this variable. Okay, so according to the value of the available copies, for example, if the available copies will be greater than 0, only then we will start a transaction. Otherwise we will just ignore the request for the checkout of a book. Okay, so we will write a condition here like if @available copies is greater than 0, like we have some books available, then we will start writing by begin and end, and between the begin and end we will actually start a transaction. So I have yet not talked about the transitions much, but we will see them in detail in coming videos. But right now you can think of transactions as the single unit of work. So whatever you write between the begin transactions and the commit transactions, all the queries, all the multiple queries, they will be treated as a single unit of task. Okay, either all of them will be successful or everything will be rolled back. Okay, so we will start a transaction here with the keyword like begin transaction. Okay, and after the begin transaction we will insert a record into the transaction table. So we can actually insert a record to transaction table, because we are checking that if the available copies are greater than 0, it means that we can start a transaction. So we can write the insert query, insert into, and the transactions table. So the transaction table is this one, okay. And after that we can actually provide the list of the columns in the transaction table. So I can actually refresh the tables here, and I should find a transactions table. So this is the transactions table, and I can expand this one, expand columns. So these are the columns, so I can just simply drag and drop the columns here. So these are the columns available in the table. But the transaction ID column, this is the identity column, so we do not need to provide any input for this particular column. And for rest of the columns we can provide the input values. So I can write like values here, and then in the bracket I can provide the values. The first column is the book ID. So for the book ID we actually have the the variable parameter that will be passed to the procedure. And then for the next column, borrower ID, we also got the borrower ID input parameter. Now the third one is the checkout date, okay. For the checkout date we also have the parameter from here, so we can take this one, okay. So we will insert a record into the transactions table that the transaction got happened here, okay. And when a record will be inserted to the transactions table, then it will insert a record and a new transaction ID will be generated. So if you want to know the transaction ID, so the transaction ID is the output parameter, and we need to return this value back to the store procedure. So what we need to do, we need to assign the value to the transaction ID. So we can say set transaction ID equal to, and we can write the scope identity, okay. So if you write scope identity, so this will insert the last inserted identity value in this particular scope in the transactions table to the transaction ID, okay. And then this value will be returned. Now after that particular thing, we can actually update the books table. So if you look at the books table, so we have the status here, and then we have the available copies. So when a book will be borrowed, then we will reduce the available copies to available copies -1, and we will also update the status to available if the available copies are greater than 0, otherwise we will update to not available. So we can actually write an update statement here. I can write update books, okay, and then set. So if you want to refresh the cache here, the IntelliSense thing here, so you can go to edit and then go to IntelliSense and then click on refresh local cache, okay. So you can click on this one so that it can actually know all the columns in the table, okay. So I'm going to update the books table, and I want to update the available copies. So I can write available copies here, available copies equal to available copies -1, okay. So we will update the available copies column, and we will update based on the where condition, where book ID equal to, and the book ID we are actually getting from the input parameter, so we can pass this one. And now the second column is the status, so I can also update the status as well, status equal to. So now in the status we can actually write case statement here, like case when available copies -1, like after reducing -1 from the available copies, if it is 0, then we can say not available, okay. Otherwise we can say like available. So that's the simple thing, okay. So yeah, this is how the update statement will work, and we will put AND, okay. So this is how we can update the books table. And after updating the books table, we can actually update the borrowers table as well. So here we can write like update books table, and then after this we can also update the borrowers table. Like if you look at the borrowers table, so we can actually increase the number of books borrowed here for a particular borrower. So I can say update borrower table. So here we can write the update statement like update borrowers, okay, set number of books borrowed equal to number of books borrowed plus 1. Okay, so we will increase the number of books borrowed where borrower id equal to @borrower id. Okay, so this is how we can update the borrowers table as well. So if after inserting a record and after updating the books table and the borrowers table, if all these queries are successful, so this is a single transaction, then we will commit the transaction. Okay, we can write like we can commit the transactions. So how we can commit the transaction? We need to write commit transaction. Okay, so this is how the transaction can be committed. So after the commit transaction, we actually need to calculate the due date. Okay, so how we will calculate the due date? So the due date can be calculated by adding the 2 weeks to the borrowing date or the checkout date. Okay, so we have a checkout date here in the transactions table, so we can simply add the 2 weeks to the checkout date to get the due date. So we can write set @due date equal to, and we can use the date add function here. So I can write date add. Okay, and I want to add week here, so I can write a week. Okay, and how many weeks we want to add? We want to add 2 weeks. Okay, and to which date we want to add 2 weeks? To the checkout date. Okay, so this will add the 2 weeks to the checkout date. Okay, this is how the first condition is written if the available copies are greater than 0. Okay, and in the else condition, for example, if the book is not available, then we can simply raise an error that in the begin and between the end we can actually raise a error that the book is not available. So how we can raise the error? There is a function here like raise error. So this raise error function is available in the SQL server to raise an error. So we can say like book is not available for checkout. Okay, so this is how we can raise an error, and the severity level of the error will be 16. The number severity, it represents the severity, the level of the error. It actually ranges from 0 to 25, and they indicate the degree of the impact of the error. Okay, so for example, if you are passing a value between 0 to 10, then it means that they are the information messages. Okay, these are not considered the errors, but they provide the information about the execution of the query or the store procedure. However, if you pass the value between the 11 and 16, then they indicate the error messages and they should be corrected by the user. So that's why we are passing the value of 16, and then we can pass the final state as 1. Okay, so this is how you can raise an error in the store procedure. Okay, and once the error got happened, then we can actually use the return keyword here. Okay, so we will return this particular error. It seems like we use the begin and end. Okay, and for this particular begin keyword, we also need to write an end keyword here again. Okay, so this is how the full store procedure is created. Okay, so now what I can do, I can actually execute this one, and let's see. So it's saying like incorrect syntax near raise error. Okay, so it seems like there is an issue with the raise error. So what is the issue here? Actually, I have written the E 2 times, it should be only 1 time. Okay, now I can click on execute, and the store procedure has been created. Okay, so now we can actually execute the store procedure and see like how it will behave. So if you see here, there are 3 input parameters: book ID, borrower ID, and the checkout date, and there are 2 output parameters like the due date and the transactions ID. So if I see in the SQL Server table, so we have 3 SQL Server tables, and right now the first 2 tables have the data like the book ID have 1, 2 and 3, and similarly the borrower ID are 1, 2 and 3. Okay, so if you look for the book ID 3 for the Harry Potter, the available copies are 2. Okay, and right now none of the borrower has borrowed any book. So now let's try to actually borrow a book. So I can maybe copy this particular thing from here and paste it here, so that it can help me to call the store procedure correctly. Okay, and here if you see the due date and for the transaction ID, these are the output parameters. So while calling the store procedure, I need to create the the variables for these two parameters. So I can actually declare the variables here, declare at the rate due date of type date, and then the another one is the transaction ID. So I can maybe use the same one, transaction ID integer. Okay, and how I can call the store procedure, exec, and then the store procedure name. Okay, and now the first parameter is the book ID. So suppose I want to borrow the Harry Potter book, so I can pass the value as 1. Okay, and now the second parameter is the borrower ID. So suppose Bob want to borrow the book, so we can pass the borrower ID as 2. Okay, and then the checkout date. So suppose today we want to borrow the book, and today is 2024 02 18. Okay, so the next parameter is the due date. So the due date will be calculated by the store procedure by itself. So we can just use this parameter here, due date, and we can call it as out. Okay, when you call it as out, so it means that this will be the output parameter. Okay, and now the last parameter is the transaction ID. Okay, so we can just give the transaction ID and we can say out. Okay, and then we can just write the select at the rate due date and then the at the rate transaction ID. Okay, so this is how we can call the store procedure. So I can simply execute the store procedure here. So I can click on execute. So this has inserted a record into the transactions table. So if you see here, the the due date is the 2024 0303. Okay, they have added the 2 weeks to this particular date. Okay, and the transaction ID is the 1. Transaction ID 1 is coming from the transactions table. So if you rerun the select query here, so you can see a entry into the transactions table. Okay, the Bob has borrowed 1 book and the available copies for the Harry Potter are 2. Okay, what I can do, I can actually rerun this query with the same parameter. Okay, so suppose the Bob Smith again take the same copy. Okay, that's fine, we are just testing this particular store procedure. So suppose if the Bob Smith again take the same book, then the number of books borrowed should be changed to 2, and for the Harry Potter the number of available copies should be changed to 1. Okay, let me check the available copies. It seems like the available copies did not reduced, because even in the beginning the available copies were 2. Okay, and they are still 2. So it means that there is some issue with the update statement maybe. Okay, so I can check the store procedure. So if you see here, we are actually updating the available copies with the available copies -1 for a particular book ID. So ideally it should be reduced. I think I passed the book ID as 1. Okay, so they borrowed actually the Lord of the Rings. Okay, so the available copies in the beginning they were 5 and now they are 4. Okay, so this is good. I was actually got confused, so this is fine. So now suppose the Bob, he want to borrow the Harry Potter. Okay, so the ID for the Harry Potter is 3. So what I can do, I can pass the value as 3. Okay, so now if the Bob borrowed the Harry Potter, so now the available copies should change to 1. Okay, and the number of books borrowed should change to 2. So let me call this particular store procedure again, and it should also insert one more record into the table. So the store procedure ran fine, and now if I recheck the data in the tables, so now the Bob Smith, he has taken 2 books. Okay, and now the available copies for the Harry Potter, they are 1. Okay, because initially there were 2 copies available and now 1 copy has already taken, so that's why only 1 copy is available. And now a new record got inserted to the transactions table. The 3 book ID has been borrowed and the borrower is the ID number 2. Now let me execute the same store procedure again. Suppose now this time the Alice with the the borrower ID 1, she takes the Harry Potter book. Okay, the book number 3. So after executing this particular store procedure, what should happen, that the the available copies should change to 0 and the status should change to unavailable. Okay, this is what it should happen. And suppose I'm giving this checkout date something else, maybe February 20, so that this checkout date should change. Okay, so let me execute the store procedure again. So the procedure ran fine, and now if you check the data again, so now you can see that the available copies of Harry Potter, they have reduced to 0 and the status got changed to not available. Okay, and one book has been borrowed by the Alice here, you can see that. So if you look at the checkout date, so the checkout date is also changed to the 20th February 2024. Okay, so this was one of the the starting store procedure for the book management system. Okay, and for example, let me call this particular store procedure one more time for the same record, and this time it should throw an error. Okay, this saying that book is not available for checkout, because we tried to borrow the Harry Potter book which is not available right now, so that's why we are getting this particular error, and it's saying like one row affected. Now suppose if we try to borrow any other book, like suppose if we try to borrow the book ID 2, then it should be borrowed. Okay, so I can give the ID 2, execute this one, so it ran successfully. And if you go to the messages, so here you are seeing some messages like one row affected, one row affected, all these messages you are seeing here. So if you do not want to return these messages, okay, so what you can do, there is a keyword actually, set no count on, so that you can actually give in the beginning of the store procedure. So we can actually write set no count on. Okay, so what this will do, after writing this particular line, it won't return these messages back to the calling store procedure. Okay, so now how we can recreate the store procedure? So we can actually write drop procedure if exist, okay, and then the store procedure name. So our store procedure name is the checkout book. Okay, so I can just re-execute this query, so this will recreate the store procedure. Okay, and now suppose if you will try to rerun the query, so the query ran fine, and if you go to messages, then we did not see any, only one row is affected. It is showing here, and this is the this select statement. So suppose if you comment out this particular line, and if you rerun the store procedure again, then you won't see any messages. So if you see, no message has been displayed here. Okay, so this was about the store procedures, like how you can create a store procedure for doing something in the SQL Server. Like this store procedure was for a library, and maybe I can create some more videos on different topics, like how we can create the store procedures on other topics as well. Okay, so I will actually share all the queries, like the queries to create the books table, borrowers table, transactions table, insert some sample data into those tables, and I will also share the create a script for the store procedure as well. Yes, so I think that's it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching the video, and if you like the video, then please click the like button. Do subscribe to our channel, press the bell icon and click on all, so that you will be notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you so much.